Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Before I get on with the games, I have something I need to mention. I am not a fan of the UFC. During the last fight night, I ignored the hell out of the UFC in favor of the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. There are a lot of things about it that I don't like that turn me away, but I'll cover a couple of the major ones. First is the gloves. They recently changed the gloves for UFC 300, so they're wider and flatter now. Or in other words, they look more likely to cause brain damage. Next, weight cutting is the most abysmal thing I have ever laid eyes on. Picture this: one fighter who is in the proper weight class and is totally healthy and hydrated versus another fighter who has just spent the last 3 months starving and dehydrating themselves into a catatonic state. Weight cutting is erroneously close to fight fixing. You can't expect a starving and dehydrated fighter to go out and perform at the same level as a fighter who is perfectly fed and wide awake. It's cruel and unusual. It's like setting up an antelope to get eaten by a lion. Third, and this is the least important, I don't like to watch the rolling. A standing grapple for a knee or a clinch is fine, but if I want to watch hugging and cuddling, I'll go watch My Little Pony. With that said, today we're going to take a look at 5 UFC fighting games. It's been a long time since my last 5 games video, so thank you to everybody who's been here for a while, and welcome to everybody who's new. Let's get started. Ultimate Fighting Championship, developed by Opus Studio and Anchor and published by THQ in 2000. I couldn't find any info about the team that worked on it, so I'll use this opportunity to talk about the UFC itself. This game comes from a time when the UFC was really just an extended infomercial for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I don't believe in all of the conspiracy theories, but there is one hard fact about the UFC one that makes it hard to take seriously. Fighters were all told that this would be a no-holds-barred fight and there were no rules on clothes. That is until the day came to sign liability waivers. At the last second, the Gracies decided that the other fighters couldn't wear shoes if they meant to kick, and they couldn't wear hand wraps, and gloves had to be 6 ounces or less. But Royce Gracie was allowed to wear his gi and belt. For a fighter like Ken Shamrock, that spelled danger. Not only was he not allowed to wear his wrestling boots, but he was also a submission grappler. When he finally got choked out, it wasn't because Royce put the arm around him or caught him in a triangle or something. It was because he used his belt to fucking strangle him. In the second fight, Ken was allowed to wear his shoes, and even bloodied and welted Royce without actually taking much damage himself. That fight was called a draw, but it was pretty obvious who won that fight. I've never played any of these UFC games before, so I don't really know what to expect. I'm just hoping it's a good fighting game. The career mode here is really stupid and kind of boring. The idea is simple. Create a fighter, fight through some sparring matches to increase your skill points. You can pick from 5 different fighting styles, including kickboxing, submission, sumo, jiu-jitsu, and pit fighting. One of these things is not like the other. Pit fighting is not a fucking fighting style, it's a venue. I picked kickboxing because I prefer a striking style, and with that I chose the jiu-jitsu outfit because if Royce Gracie can wear his gi, then so can I. There isn't a lot of customization. There also isn't a whole lot of career. The idea is really just to beat every fighter on the leaderboard, and meeting certain conditions in the fight will change how many skill points you get to spend. It's complete ass, but there is more here than that. The UFC mode is pretty much your standard arcade ladder. Fight through a few opponents and you win. Winning the UFC mode with a fighter means you get a fighter's silver belt, and it's on to Champion Road, which is where you defend your title continuously from 12 dudes. You also unlock that fighter's style for use in career mode, but again, it's essentially just 12 title defense fights. It's another arcade ladder, again, which sounds simple in theory, but the reality is that it's extremely RNG heavy and kind of a luck thing. The gameplay here is essentially a Tekken clone with a couple of differences. Buttons are laid out corresponding to the limb that you want to strike with, and you can grapple by combining 2 buttons together. Unlike Tekken, you can move freely around the octagon without double tapping the direction, but that also means aerial attacks don't exist. I think it's because they didn't want to come off as a bullshito fighting, but pit fighting's not a fighting style, it is kind of bullshito. There are a variety of combos, and the striking is fast and snappy, but there's not a whole lot here, and there aren't a lot of combos to play with. Fights play out in timed rounds until the opponent either taps or gets knocked out. Simple, right? Wrong! Your health bar at the top isn't just a health bar, it doubles as a stamina bar. The red portion represents your total overall health, and the blue portion represents your available stamina. If you get punched or kicked while your stamina is at 0, instant knockout. Hitting your opponent's guard will drop your stamina just as much as getting punched. I can live with that. But something I fucking hate about this game is the instant submission. Performing a grapple during a takedown will do a submission, and grappling a grapple will perform a reversal. The way to win this game is to avoid getting taken down by any means necessary, but once you're down, you become the victim of the RNG. Based on my experience, there's about an 80-20 chance that the CPU just denies your reversals and taps you instantly. Even if you do nail the timing, the CPU will just reverse most of your reversals, so there's no clear or consistent strategy strategy to winning, and I'm pretty sure there isn't supposed to be. The developers were probably aiming to capture the random, unpredictable nature of the UFC, so sometimes enemies just don't even fight back at all. But this is a video game, and this kind of cheap shit makes the game more frustrating than fun. Visually, actually, not that bad. I'm playing the Dreamcast version, and it's a massive step above the PS1 version for a lot of reasons, but the actual design of the game universally is pretty good, regardless of the platform. The octagon's a great size and looks good, the character models all look fine, and you really haven't lived until you've seen Big John McCarthy as a low-poly video game character. Truth be told, I'm just glad it isn't hard to look at. The soundtrack is also pretty good, and I would have used some of it, but I can't find a proper rip of it anywhere. There's some licensed music, some original music, and the bulk of it is heavy rock and metal. Fighting is one of those things where the music thematically changes depending on the fighter, the league, and the venue, but generally speaking, metal and rap are two of the most used genres, so it works really well here. Finally, there is real-world footage of fighting here, but it's very hard to watch. The color is gold-tinted, and every knockout and slam is timed with a bright flash of light and a shake. This alone warranted a photosensitivity warning. I've watched boxing matches from the 1910s and 20s that are higher quality and more easily viewable than this. It probably inspired people in the real world to fight to some degree. I mean, I imagine a few people out there threw a solid front kick at their television because this shit was just hard to look at. But wise man say, television not hit back. If anybody started a career in fighting specifically because of this game, I would love to hear that story. With all that said, I'll go ahead and give Ultimate Fighting Championship a rating of 6 out of 10. If it wasn't for the insane RNG and the instant tap-out system, this game would actually be really great. It reminds me a lot of playing Tekken, but with a few changes. Honestly, if I were playing this exclusively as a multiplayer game, it would probably be awesome. But I was doing the opposite and playing it entirely as a single-player game, and that portion isn't great. As an adult, it's fun for an hour, but if I was a kid, I would have put it down and never touched it again. The reason it gets a 6 is because the gameplay fundamentally works and there aren't any major bugs. In a multiplayer situation where there isn't any crazy RNG, it's probably a better game, but I can't recommend it if you're looking for a solo-friendly fighting game. It's just unnecessarily punishing. Next up, UFC Throwdown, developed by Opus and published jointly by Crave, Ubisoft, and Capcom in 2002. The developer-in-chief, Ryota Hayashi, is an interesting character. Hayashi-san previously worked on Surfing H3O and Wave Rally as a graphics artist. Later on, he served as the producer for Half Minute Hero, a programmer on Kid Icarus Uprising for the 3DS, and most recently he served as the CG art director for the Windows version of Saga Scarlet Grace. To say that career is weird is an understatement, but even weirder than that, 23 of the team members from the scooter game World Tour worked on this. I guess we finally smacked into the Crave Sports iceberg. The career mode here is a little bit different than last time. You still create a fighter from a very limited selection, and I'll say it again, pit fighting is not a fucking fighting style. Once you've created a fighter, the idea is simple. Brainless, really. Complete a series of insanely easy challenges to increase your stats, and then have a real sparring match once in a while. The challenges themselves are so fucking stupid. Right punch your opponent 1 time. Left punch your opponent 1 time. Kick your opponent 3 times. This is really sad, honestly. At least there's still a tournament to fight through, and a wide selection of real-world fighters to play as. But damn, if this isn't the worst career mode I've seen in a long time. The gameplay is astonishingly identical to the last one. Like, literally the exact same game. I can't even really say anything about it. It's just the exact same Tekken clone with instant tap-outs like it was before. I wish I had more to say, but there really isn't a lot of complexity here. One thing I have to give these games credit for is how simple they are. I feel like somebody who's never played a video game before could probably play pretty easily until the RNG frustration hits. Visually, despite being a generation further, this game looks a hell of a lot worse somehow. The models themselves don't look bad, but the animation is garbage. Fighters twist and move in the most unnatural ways, and there's no sense of polish to any of it. It actually kind of feels like a beta that just barely hit the polishing stage when it suddenly had to get pushed out the door like right now. It looks like there was potential for really good visuals, but that just unfortunately didn't happen. The soundtrack is also the exact same as before. A lot of instrumental stuff, mostly metal, and it sounds like something you might hear in any other fighting game. Not much to say. Finally, I couldn't watch the FMV footage because PCSX2 crashed every single time a video loaded, so I'll go ahead and give UFC Throwdown a rating of 3 out of 10. It's just bad. It's not really one of the worst games I've ever played, and it isn't that memorable. It's just bland, boring, and bad. I've said 100 times in the past, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the first game needed a lot of fixing, and that didn't happen here. It somehow managed to actually be worse. At least I can be glad about moving on and never having to play it again, right? Right? Next up, UFC Tapout, developed by Dream Factory and also jointly published by Crave, Capcom, and Ubisoft in 2002. Dream Factory is the studio that previously developed the Tobal Duo, as well as the weird-ass Final Fantasy VII wrestling game Urgite's God Bless the Ring. Yes, you heard that correctly. You can play as Cloud Strife in a weird-ass Japanese pro wrestling hybrid fighting game. I can't find much information about the team members themselves, but their history with fighting games has me thinking that maybe this will be a little better than the others. No career mode this time. The arcade and UFC modes are really all there is to it. I'm honestly just glad to see a traditional tournament fighter, even if there isn't any real complexity to it. I don't think I could put up with those brainless one-punch challenges again. The gameplay is very, very identical. The same thing again, but there are some extra moves and some of the standard commands have been shuffled around. Doesn't matter though, because the reversal system has been tightened more than it was before. That means instant tap-outs are much more frequent. I've seen a lot of fighting game players complain about massive 50-hit combos that take away half of your health bar, and honestly, that isn't even close to bad compared to this. Imagine getting grabbed and instantly tapped out 5 times in a row before your enemy just gives up and stops fighting altogether. Fights in this game can be won in 2 moves. Fucking abysmal. Fighting games sin. There's a classic ancient term for things like this. Bullshit. These games have all been cheap, smelly bullshit. Visually, this is actually a tremendously better game than the previous one. It actually uses more of the style from the original Ultimate Fighting Championship, and the animations and models look incredibly clean. The opening videos and announcer sequences also look good, so at least this one isn't hard to look at. I imagine it would probably be fun to watch the computer fight itself for a few minutes, if nothing else. The soundtrack, same thing, not even gonna touch it, just gonna move on. Finally, the fight footage this time around is a hell of a lot better, and there are still some stylized moments to make some of the stuff look more exciting. This is funny. The biggest improvement to any of these games so far is better quality fighting footage. I can't even be mad about that, because this actually does look like something that may inspire somebody to go become a fighter. Life is really short, but the legacy of fighting goes back to the dawn of humanity. Hellenic Greek boxers and Pancratius, Mesopotamian and Egyptian bare knuckle, Indian Mala Yutta, Burmese Letway, Cambodian Khmer, ancient Sri Lankan Angampora. Throughout history, 2 facts remain consistent. People like to fight, and people like to watch fights. At least this game paid proper respect to the fighters themselves. With all that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give UFC Tapout for the Xbox a rating of 5 out of 10. It's fine enough, but seriously, I don't think I'll remember anything about it. This entire series has been so identical so far that I'll eventually just remember all of them as one single game. The only thing that changes is the visuals, and even that can only change so much because it's based on very specific source material. All these games really needed was a proper submission system, like the health bars in Def Jam Fight for New York or the X-Ray from EA Sports MMA. Instant submissions really are the killer here. Next up, UFC Tapout 2, developed by Dream Factory and published by TDK Mediactive, Crave, and Capcom in 2003. Before I even talk about the game, I'm totally expecting it to be the exact same thing again. But I am a little extra curious because this is the only numbered sequel in the entire series. Was Tapout 1 really good enough to warrant a direct numbered sequel? Probably not, but we're gonna find out. The career is back and it's just a series of sparring matches again. The character creator is probably the best of the entire series. You can actually customize how your fighter looks, instead of just picking one of a set few skins. Pit fighting has also been excluded as a fighting style, so somebody over at Dream Factory knew that was bullshit. Aside from that, nothing to say, same thing. I can't really speak too much about the gameplay because Zimu just wouldn't run this game properly while OBS was running, but even in slow motion, it was pretty easy to tell it's the exact same thing with a few new fighting styles. Saw that coming. Visually, it does look a little bit better than the previous game, but that's like saying a lime looks a little bit better than a lemon. It's the same fucking thing. The soundtrack, again, same thing. At this point, I'm sick of repeating myself, so we'll just move on. Finally, the real fight footage has reverted back into the gold-tinted garbage of the Dreamcast game. Straight up unwatchable. Who the fuck thought that was a good idea? With all that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give UFC Tapout 2 a rating of 2 out of 10. When I'm not running OBS and the game runs normally, it's just the exact same thing again. I'm so bored now that I can feel my brain trying to escape from my skull. We talk a lot of shit in the modern age about how EA Sports UFC games games are all identical, but I can't even blame them. The precedent was set long before they ever got to it. Honestly, this is like the grandfather predecessor to every modern shitstorm we have today. These games are so lazily identical that they would fit in perfectly among every release from 2013 forward. I understand that fighting games are repetitive in nature, but if you look at stuff like the King of Fighters and Fatal Fury, or the Street Fighter series, or the Tekken series, or even the difference between Melty Blood Actress Again and Type Lumina, you can actually see the real changes made to those games. You can see them trying to get better. You can't see that here. Last game up, UFC Sudden Impact, developed by Opus and published by Global Star Software in 2004. Hayashi-san has moved positions from developer-in-chief to director of development, whatever the difference is there, and there are a lot of names here working in collaborative effort. Some of the programmers come from Tonal Corporation. I'm not completely sure, but I think Tonal is a company that produces AI-powered exercise equipment. Another group comes from the Japanese game studio Gosho. They've worked on indie games, they've outsourced themselves to other games, and they've even put in some work on Street Fighter V. One of the 3D designers, Ari Sawada, worked on every SmackDown vs. Raw, as well as the WWE 2K series all the way up until 2K19. Most recently, he was the art director for AEW Fight Forever. After the last 3 games, I'm not really expecting any of it to be different, but who knows, maybe this one is suddenly a banger. The career mode here is the exact same thing from Throwdown. Do a few dumb challenges that are over as fast as they start, and they're all like one punch or a couple of kicks. And also the return of pit fighting. I'll say it again for the I've lost count amount of times. Pit fighting is not a fucking fighting style. That's like calling the Kumite a fighting style. It's not a style. Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's never going to happen. The gameplay is the exact same thing again. Big shocker, who knew? But this time around, there is a secret weapon that's almost unbeatable. Vitor Belfort is one of the most broken characters in all of fighting game history. I won 20 arcade ladder fights in just over 5 minutes by spamming the square triangle punch combo repeatedly. I fought my way through half of the roster of real fighters, and then finally during the 21st match, the computer hit me with a custom fighter that specialized in instant submission. This game quite literally had to cheat to get me to stop. This is the most pathetic experience so far. Visually, it somehow manages to look simultaneously better and worse. The fighter models are fine, and the octagon looks good, but the custom character options and the Big John McCarthy model have been completely destroyed. Big John looks like the Johnny I inflation scene from the Guitar Hero 2 bonus video. The fighting itself looks a tiny bit cleaner, but it's not as snappy, and it's barely noticeable that it's different at all. The soundtrack, surprisingly, is a really good mix of original music and licensed music. I don't recognize any of it, but the metal theme is still going strong. It fits in well with the rest of the game. This is one part that's been consistently good about all of these, despite not having much to say about it. It's just the same soundtrack theme that spreads across 5 of the exact same game. Finally, this game does have real fight footage, and this is the best footage so far. It's clean, high quality, fun to watch. You get some of the greater highlights of the early UFC, and they didn't add a ton of weird effects or colors. Life is really short, and I don't think any athletes think about it as much as fighters do. Fighting is dangerous. It's painful. They put themselves through the most excruciating training for months at a time just to have a fight that usually only lasts a few minutes. Everybody has a different reason for it. Some fight for the money, some fight for the fame and the glory, some fight for closure, and some fight just because they want to test themselves against adversity. Regardless of why they do it, the work and the dedication is inspiring. With all of that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give Sudden Impact a rating of 2 out of 10. Same thing again, but brutally easy now because Vitor Belfort is just god tier. None of these games have been as much fun as the first one. At least with the first game, all of these ideas were new and fresh. Like I said before, a lot of shit talk gets passed around about EA and the modern UFC games, but at least they didn't just make this exact same thing again. If anybody out there is like, nah bro, the old UFC games were better because they didn't have all the modern problems, then I genuinely feel sorry for you. Games weren't just better because they were made for older consoles. In so many cases like this, it was the exact same bullshit. I want to read a paragraph from Chris Crawford's Art of Computer Game Design because I think it fits in perfectly here. People without original ideas for games fell back on the sports games as models around which to design. This also served a useful marketing purpose. Why would a conservative consumer buy a game with a title and subject completely alien to his experience? Better to offer him a game he's already familiar with. Thus, we have games based on basketball, basketball, football, baseball, soccer, tennis, boxing, and others. All of these games take liberties with their subject matter to achieve playability. The most enjoyable aspects of the computer game have very little to do with the real game. This is fortunate, for a slavish attempt at replication would have produced a poor computer game. Only by substantially altering the original games were the authors able to produce a decent design. The big takeaway from that paragraph is that sports games often come with an expected low creativity threshold, and these games are the perfect example of that. They are as uncreative as they possibly could have been, and I'm glad to be done with it. And now that I'm done with all of that, it's been pointed out to me a few times that I've been completely ignoring surfing among the action sports games. I don't know much about those games, so we'll take a vote. Would you rather see Surfing H3O, Transworld Surf, Sonny Garcia Surfing, or all three together in a set like this? The video will take an extra day or two regardless because I have to wait for the votes, but some of you guys know way more about those games than I do, so I feel like it'll be worth it to get your opinion first. Until next time. Thank you, and have a nice day.